Matt Evans is a former chef and food critic, and he now has a small holding in Tasmania in Australia. He also has a farm restaurant, and he teaches from the Fat Pig Farm. He has cows, which he milks, he has a garden, and pigs as well. And he wrote a recent book just earlier this year called Soil, The Incredible Story of What Keeps the Earth and Us Healthy, which has been a huge hit in this sector. And he was also a TV star, of course, which probably makes him a good communicator for this stuff and some of that people really well engage with. So Matt's going to talk for about 40 or 50 minutes, and then we're going to have questions coming in from our online audience and in the room. So please give a round of applause and big welcome to Matthew Evans from Australia.
G'day everybody, and welcome from, I would say sunny Australia, but it's about 20 to 1 in the morning. I didn't know there was a 1 in the morning, so it was only a 1 in the afternoon as a farmer until recently. So I just wanted to run through, I guess, why I'm interested in soil and what got me excited about soil. As Suzanne said, I wrote a book on soil called, unsurprisingly, Soil. And what I discovered, I guess, about when I was a chef, I trained as a chef nearly 40 years ago, and the only thing I thought about soil was it was something that I got in trouble for walking into the house, or it was something I had to get off the potatoes, or it was something that I got under my nails. And I never thought of it as anything other than dirt, I guess. And a few years ago, I've been growing food, and I got really excited about soil. I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing stuff." Every day I'm dealing with how to grow things, and how to grow things has everything to do with soil. And I'd written, I think it was like 10 or 11 books, but a lot of them were recipe books. And went to my publisher and I said, "I want to write a book on soil." And anyone in the room who today may have seen this reaction. If you're really into soil and you talk to someone who's not into soil, I said, I really want to write a book about, how there can be more living things in a teaspoon of soil than, the amount that would fit in the end of my thumb. More living things in that amount of soil than there are humans on the planet. 10 billion living things. And she went like this, looking down, and I'm thinking, whoa, she's looking for soil. She's excited about it. She knows this is the difference between life on Earth and no life on Earth, right? And so, but of course, no, as a lot of you might know, as people as growers, if you're passionate about soil and you want to talk to people about soil, she was looking at her feet. She was looking anywhere but in my eye. And I realized that if I want to get people interested in soil, then I have to try a little bit harder and find reasons for them to care. So what I want to do today is I'll run you through quite a few little things that I guess have got me excited about soil. Because one of the things I've discovered is that while I came to farming later in life, at about 40 years of age, not all growers or all farmers are actually interested in soil. And as I guess in the way that I am. And some of them see it, I guess, more as a growing medium as opposed to a living, breathing superorganism. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint, put up a few bits and pieces. Just excuse me for a sec while I get that set up. There we go. No worries. So this is my farm. It's probably a bit slightly blurry. It's actually one long rectangle. There's a restaurant at one end, there's our house in the middle, and through the centre is a wildlife corridor. And because it's a rectangle, you can't quite see it on here, it's just my fencing map. There's some bush up here, some forest, and some regrowth forest here. And about 40% of the farm is for wildlife. It's a mixed farm, so dairy cows, beef cattle, meat goats, bees, chooks, ducks, a market garden, about 1 kilometre worth of garden beds, pigs, heritage orchard. We grow about 50 types of apple tree. It's all old apple growing country. So my topic today is soil matters. And soil only matters, I guess, if you like to sleep indoors or eat or clothe yourself or live, basically. And I think that's what my publisher didn't really get the concept of, and what a lot of people don't understand. In fact, one person I was talking to, actually, I'll explain a bit later. But they were saying that soil isn't sexy. Why are you trying to make it interesting? Why are you trying to make it sexy? And I don't think I'm trying to make it sexy, but that was her words. So this is soil, brown, for the non-grower, fairly boring. Not that interesting. This is a rainforest near where I live. This is an ancient rainforest. Some of the trees here were around when Jesus was born. So pretty old trees, pretty, amazing thick topsoil. You walk in that forest and you get this real visceral sense of wonder and joy. This is the Great Barrier Reef. It's, a massive reef off the east coast of Australia. It's about as long as, it's 700 kilometres or so long. I think maybe even longer, 1,500 kilometres long. Amazing. If you dive over that reef, you get this wonder and visceral pleasure, and you think, this is something that I need to treasure and protect. This is a quoll. I just like it. It's a cute animal that one of them lives under our deck. It's a native marsupial, endangered, but beautiful. We can all appreciate something like this, some sort of wildlife. And this is soil, and someone's tried to make it interesting. They've scooped it up in their hands and given it a love heart shape. Oh, I love soil. And again, for the non-soil people, it's pretty boring. It's brown. If you're there in real life, it's not doing much. It's not moving. It doesn't give us that pleasure. Like if you go, if you're under a waterfall, or if you're, in some amazing, majestic forest as it changes color. Soil doesn't have that benefit. And so this journalist asked me, she said to me, are you trying to make soil sexy? Because to me, she said, to her, soil was as sexy as colon cancer, as cancer of the bowel. And, and that's what, sadly, it seems like we're up against if you're interested in soil. And look, to be honest, I'm no expert. I haven't had colon cancer, but I don't think it's got anything to recommend it. So I guess what I'd like to do today is maybe reframe how you think of soil and give you some reasons to care about soil beyond maybe the obvious. So this is food, pretty important. This is some broad beans and halloumi that we've made from our Jersey milk on the farm. Again, something easy for people to get a bit more interested in. When we farm our land, we think of the Malakadee. The Malakadee have Aboriginal people who've been feeding themselves here for 42,000 years. Now, that's a long time in human terms, 42,000 years. So agriculture, we call it in Australia European-style farming, but it originated in the Middle East. It's been around for about 10,000 years. So, the fact that people have lived here and fed themselves for 42,000 years, that's kind of forever in human terms. So that's our framework when we look at our land and when I think of growing food generally and how humans will feed themselves into the future. Can we do it 400? My brain can't do 42,000, but 404,000 years into the future. We have this idea on our farm. We're very interested in soil and we're interested in growing food. And growing food, apparently, according to one of our market gardeners, we have a couple of gardeners who work with us, it isn't rocket science, she tells me one day. It isn't rocket science, Matthew, growing food. It's way more complex than that. Way, way, way more complex than that. You only have to think of weather and, what's going to happen tomorrow. We've got an idea, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen in a week. We've really got no clue. And we're dealing with complex systems. So rocket science is chemistry and physics. And chemistry and physics have fairly set laws, but they don't deal with as much chaos as biology. And growing food is dealing with biology. So it's really, really complex. When I say complex, we're talking about, those living things. So that amount of soil scooped into those hands that look like a love heart, there can be 5,000 insects from and arachnids, worms and mollusks from 500 species. There could be 100,000 protozoa, 10,000 nematodes. Nematodes, microscopic worms. I've never even heard of them 8 years ago. So I'd been growing food for 6 years and never even heard of a nematode. Nematodes are the most common multicellular creature on Earth, something like 80% of all multicellular creatures on Earth are nematodes, and I didn't even know they existed. 90% of those live in soil. Anyway, there can be 500 meters of plant roots, obviously plant roots in soil, 100 billion bacteria from 10,000 species, and 100 kilometers of fungal filaments, these fine threads of fungal hyphae. And all of this stuff, and I know some of you, or maybe most of you have heard this before, but I think it never hurts to emphasize that when we talk healthy soil, when we're interested in growing food, healthy soil by definition means alive. And this is the sort of stuff that lives in soil. And when we think of soil, we have to think of it as a living, breathing superorganism. And maybe sometimes it's good to reframe. You're going to think this weird Australian guy from Tasmania, wherever that is, the arse end of the world, right down here at the bottom of Australia. You're going to think I'm mad, because I'm going to say that plants can talk and bacteria can count. And I'm not going to go into it today. I don't have time. You've got some great scientists coming up. You've got some wonderful speakers coming up over the next couple of days, and they may touch on some of this. But what I want to show you here is these fine fungal threads, the hyphae of fungi. So people, think of fungi as mushrooms, but most of the body and most of the fungi are actual threads running through soil. In fact, most fungi on Earth live in soil. And those threads, they're about 1/60th the width of a root hair, the root hairs on your plants, and they can go through soil about 2,000 up to 2,000 times further than the roots of the plant. So they're going everywhere, and this is going to sound a bit weird. You're welcome to go and look this up. I've got a couple of photos in a sec that might help explain this. But a plant can talk, and it's going to, not in the way that we talk, but a plant can communicate, and it can say, "I need things from soil." And those living things, the 10 billion living things in a teaspoon of healthy soil, they find things for the plant. So what a plant does, it can make its own sugars out of the air, photosynthesis. A plant uses the sun's energy to split apart carbon dioxide and water and make carbohydrate. So a plant can get that from the air, carbohydrate, that's the bulk of it, but it needs things from soil. One of the things it might want from soil is nitrogen. And I love this because it shows what the underground ecosystem can do for a plant. So these are fungal hyphae. There's a couple of different shots. This one's little sticky knobs running along the hyphae. This is actually what they call a constricting ring. It's 3 cells of the fungus, and that forms a little loop, and that's designed as a trap. It's designed to trap things. So the plant might say, "I need some nitrogen." Say you're growing some, wheat. The wheat might say, "Look, I really need some nitrogen." Nitrogen is a macronutrient for a plant, so it really, really needs nitrogen. And so there's no nitrogen right next to the roots. And if you're not using artificial nitrogen, it's not readily available, like just spread, splashed around. So how does the plant get nitrogen? Well, it can ask the fungus, "Can you get me some nitrogen?" And the fungus can go over and maybe find a legume, maybe some clover or a plant that fixes nitrogen. It's not actually the legume that fixes nitrogen. It's the bacteria around the roots of that legume. But if there's no legume, what else can happen? Well, the fungi can say, "Look, maybe I can find you some nitrogen. I'll see if I'll have a crack at finding you some nitrogen." And what's got nitrogen in it? Living things, nematodes. And these little constrictive rings and these little sticky dots, what a fungus can do, it can actually lasso nematodes, living little microscopic worms, and suck the nitrogen out of it, and then pass that nitrogen along these fungal threads back to the plant. And it doesn't happen for free. What the plant does is it has to pay the fungus for doing this, and it pays it by giving it sugar. So some of the sugar the plant creates out of photosynthesis, it passes along. So plants can talk and bacteria can count. So what that means is bacteria actually know what other bacteria are nearby and how many are nearby of their own species. And when they get to a certain number, you get this sudden burst in activity. And I reckon Elaine Ingham, who's going to be on later today, if she doesn't talk about it, ask her the question about this. It's called quorum sensing. So what it means is that when you get a certain amount of active life in soil, you suddenly get this flurry of activity in terms of what the bacteria can do. So this is another shot just showing the constrictive rings and sticky knobs on the on the fungi. And here's actually this one here, E. It's actually, that's a nematode, and it's got a little, one of those rings around around it. The nematode's gone through the middle, and the fungi's going to swell up that little ring and suck all the nitrogen out, pass it back to the plant. Probably use a bit for its own growth as well. Here's a little nematode sneaking away along those last three photos on the bottom of a nematode actually managing to sneak away. So we have to sometimes reframe how we think of what's happening in soil, because it is a bloodbath down there. There's all this, it is an ecosystem, the same as that rainforest I showed you, the same as that the Great Barrier Reef. But a single shovelful of soil is more biodiverse than the entire Amazon rainforest, the above ground bit of the Amazon rainforest. So when we think of biodiversity, we often think of the stuff we can see, but actually soil is way more biodiverse. Not everything's single-celled organisms like bacteria or archaea or protozoa, stuff like that. Some things are a little bit bigger. So an American researcher did this and found that in a single footfall in a forest, there can be his boot could be supported on 120,000 legs, one footfall, 120,000 legs on 16,000 little critters. Now, when you're trying to make soil sexy, sometimes it helps if you can show a photo like I did of those nematodes, or when you're trying to make soil interesting. I can't make it sexy. I try. But there are some really great people doing some macro photography, and what they do is they can take photos of those little critters. Remember, maybe 16,000 under a single footfall in a forest. And this is one of those creatures with its jointed legs. It's a springtail, and it's sitting on a snail egg. And this photo is taken by a guy who I just love. There's a few of them around, Frank Ashwood's one, but this is taken by a guy named Andy Murray. When he's not playing tennis, might be a different Andy Murray. He does these photos. It's under Chaos of Delight if you want to look up the sort of work he does. But then we can actually picture, I guess, those electron microscope pictures of the nematodes being eaten by fungi. These sort of glorious coloured photos of the mesofauna, the middle-sized and life in soil, maybe give us a better indication of what's out there. How do we get people to care about soil? Well, I think we have to tell its story, because it's a bit dull to look at. If you can see soil, it's dying. It shouldn't be exposed to the air. It's always trying to get covered by green living plants or by leaf litter. So we kind of got to tell its stories. It doesn't scream when it's dying. So it's one of those things we have to use, even with those photos, we have to use that beautiful human capacity to imagine what's happening down there. And as growers, if we can imagine what's happening down there, it gives us, I guess, better tools, because growing food is really complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated, because nature is a self-organizing system if we work with nature. How do we fall in love with soil? Well, I guess some people never will, but my mission is to try and get more people to fall in love with soil. Growing things. If you grow stuff, like you suddenly go, oh my God, why is that patch growing better? Why am I, I grow lots of different vegetables, 60 species of annual vegetable in our vegetable garden. Why do my carrots taste better every year? Why do the lettuces taste better every year? Because they're being grown in soil that is getting more and more, it's getting more healthy. It's getting a more complex ecosystem. It's got more organic matter. So growing things gets you excited about soil. How do you connect non-growers to soil? Tell some stories. So one of the ones I love to do is just say, well, over half the antibiotics used in human medicine have their genesis in soil. Gave a talk when the book first came out. And it was some researchers in Queensland in the north of Australia, and they were wondering if I've ever found through my research any cultural groups or villages or whatever who are more resistant to disease. And the reason they were doing that is because they know that the next generation of antibiotics lives in soil, but we have to find it. And the reason we know it's there but we haven't found it yet is because 98% of what lives in soil is still a mystery. We know it's there because we can do complex DNA analysis and all that kind of stuff, and we've got the electron microscopes, so we can sort of see the stuff there, but it's not hasn't been described by science, and we don't know its role. We don't know what it does for us, for soil, for plants. But we're on the cusp, and there's lots of beautiful research being done. So yeah, that's a nice, easy one to think of with soil. Soil is an antidepressant. So we now know there are things that live in soil. There's a bacterium that lives in soil, and that acts as an antidepressant. And this came out of the UK research about, I think it was 25 years ago. Dr. Mary O'Brien, she was researching lung cancer patients, and she wanted to extend their life. So she found this bacterium that was being used for TB, tuberculosis patients, and it's actually being investigated as, it's in end stage trials for human use, this bacterium for TB. She thinks lung disease, lung cancer, this bacterium, if it's helpful in TB, can it be helpful in lung cancer? So she actually takes this bacterium, she injects it into end stage lung cancer patients. So these people are going to die of lung cancer. She's clutching at straws. She injects this bacterium into them. It's dead, a dead form. And this bacterium is everywhere in healthy soil all the time. She injects it into them, and they weren't sure, there wasn't enough people, they couldn't be sure that it extended life. But what it did do, every single patient who got it reported a better quality of life. They felt happier about themselves. They felt more contented. And it turns out that this Mycobacterium vaccae, if you don't have to inject it, you can inhale it. So when you walk around or work in your garden, or when you eat something from organically grown, spinach leaf, say, an organically grown spinach leaf has probably 600 species of bacteria on it. And at least one of those species will be Mycobacterium vaccae, because it's everywhere. When you inhale it, when you inject it, when you eat it, you get the same thing happen. What happens is you eat it, and then it creates a happy hormone effect in our brains. And they're actually researching this with higher level mammals to see if it can be a treatment for PTSD. We now also know that it can help extend the life of certain cancer patients, not lung cancer patients, not all forms of lung cancer. We know it can help with asthma. We know it can help with ulcerative colitis. It's being investigated for all sorts of things. Soil is an antidepressant. Whoa, my mind just went boof when I first heard that. Soil inoculates our immune system. There's a lot of research on immunity. Ireland, I presume, is probably like Australia. Autoimmune diseases are skyrocketing. So a lot of people interested in how to get healthy babies. I was doing work with a charity that was looking at how to get the best immune system in our newborn children in those first 2 years of life. And the big ticket items, and it works on a population level. It's not a guarantee on a personal level, of course, like all these things to do with health. But the big ticket items to have a healthy immune system, full term, natural birth, if possible, and it's not always possible, we know that. The second most important thing is breastfeeding for as long as possible, if possible. And again, we know that's not everybody can do that or do it for very long. But that's the ideal world. But the third most important thing to give the most robust immune system into a newborn is exposure to soil in the first 3 months of life. Now, and that can be actually be via a pet, because pets are bringing that in. Because what happens is the soil bacteria actually inoculates our immune system and helps to give us a better immune system. The nice thing to know about that, though, is that effect, being exposed to healthy soil, can have benefits all through life. So we know people with more exposure to healthy soil and who have access to gardens generally have a better immune system. Again, works on a population level and doesn't necessarily guarantee everybody who work for everybody. But we know that. It's almost, if you think about it, it's almost like humans were born into a world of soil, healthy soil, onto soil. It's probably how we evolved. Soil affects the climate. I think that's a really interesting one. I think a lot of people are maybe aware of that soil holds carbon. A lot of the carbon in the atmosphere today, the increase in carbon dioxide since especially since the Industrial Revolution, has come from soil. About somewhere around a quarter to a third of the increase of atmospheric carbon has come from soil. And that's because soil is the heavy lifter. We think of planting a tree as, or storing carbon, and trees are great, but it's actually often the soil underneath that's doing the heavy lifting. So soil holds about 4.5 to 6 times more carbon than all the plants on animals on Earth put together. So it's a really, really big place, and it can have an effect on climate. In Australia, we've lost about half the carbon in our soil in the last 200 years since European colonisation. And we're due to lose the next half of the carbon in the next half of our carbons. The half-life of carbon in our soil is about 50, 60 years, the way we're growing food at the moment. And obviously that can affect climate. But soil can also affect weather. And I think this is a fascinating one for me. So climate's what's going to happen over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, into the future. Weather's what's going to happen tomorrow. And I love scientists who come up with these crazy ideas about how to, they've got an idea, something they want to explore. And so this comes from a guy in America, David Sands. David Sands he wasn't a soil scientist. He was researching wheat, and he wanted to grow wheat that didn't get wheat blight. A disease of wheat is wheat blight, and it's caused by a bacterium, syringae, P. syringae, that when it gets onto it's a soil bacterium, but when it gets onto the leaf of wheat, frost can form around the bacterium at a warmer temperature than it would normally form. So frost is forming at, sort of maybe just over 1 degree instead of -2 or -1. And the frost forms, it weakens the leaf, and the bacteria then gets access to the leaf, inside the leaf defenses, and cause wheat blight. This guy's growing wheat. He's tested the soil, can't find any of this P. syringae in there. He tests all the seed, there's no P. syringae. He tests the water, there's no P. syringae. He plants the wheat, it all grows, and then all of a sudden, all over the field, all at once, it gets wheat blight. And he's thinking, oh my God, like, where did that come from? All at once. It doesn't start at one side of the field and go across, it's all at once, right across. And he thinks, well, if this bacterium can cause ice crystals, it crystallizes ice around it on the leaf at a warmer temperature, maybe it's, rain forms when ice crystals form in clouds. So maybe this bacterium is in the clouds, and that's how it came down. The ice is crystallizing around this bacterium in the clouds. He goes up in an aeroplane. I love this because it's a mad idea. He flies 3 kilometers up in the air, shoves his hand out the window. He actually gets frostbite in the process. He's got his agar plate in his hand. He's probably got more than one. And he scoops them through the air. Hopefully he's not flying the plane as well as doing this. He puts the lid on the agar plate, brings it down to Earth, incubates it, and lo and behold, he finds P. syringae in the clouds. Now, at that stage, that was late 80s, I think it was, no one believed that bacteria and diatoms and viruses, whatever, could fly into the clouds. But he discovered they did. Not only that, he wrote a scientific paper saying, well, maybe, like on Earth, like down on at ground level, P. syringae is the genesis of rain, because the ice crystals, water vapor can crystallize around this bacterium in the clouds. The ice crystals then melt, form rain. It's called bioprecipitation. And so he coins this term, bioprecipitation. Maybe soil bacteria can be the genesis of rain. And the whole world did nothing. They didn't believe it could happen. They were like my publisher, looking at their feet, I don't know, looking at the sky, didn't believe it, waited 20 years, and then discovered when they cut open, at the same university, actually, Montana State University, they cut open a bunch of hailstones after a storm and discovered in the center of every one was a bacterium, and most of the time that was P. syringae. So we now know, and it's only 2010, I think, that this started to be discovered and confirmed all around the world. Hailstones, in the center of hailstones, are often bacteria. So biological things, things like diatoms and archaea and bacteria can fly up into the clouds, and they can form the genesis of rain. So we now know that more biologically active areas, and that includes grasslands and forests, biologically active, but half the bacteria in the clouds forming rain come from soil. So soil can affect weather. And I love that. I love that sort of idea that soil can affect weather. The obvious one, 98% of all the calories that are consumed by humans come from the fact that we have topsoil. That's a pretty easy one for your average person to get interested in. But we're losing topsoil globally about 30 to 40 times faster than it's being made. So soil is imperiled. So when you grow food, when you're interested in, nourishing people through the growing of food, you also have to think about, are we nourishing soil? Because we're not doing that well, really. In fact, humans, since the agricultural revolution, about 40% of the land that we once farmed, we've abandoned. We've buggered it up. So in Australia, I play this game called Menindee or Mars. Menindee is a place. Obviously, it's pretty dry in Australia, but I do this. I'm going to show you some photos because I do this game with my audiences in Australia, and they have to guess whether it's Menindee or Mars from the photo. So that one's actually Menindee. That one's Mars, that one's Mars, and that one's Menindee. And the reason I do it is because this one's actually got a bit of grass. You might be able to see some grass there. The reason I do it is because when they finally got some high-res photos from Mars, farmers, the people of in your profession, were out there taking photos of their farms saying, hey, those photos of Mars look just like my farm. And it's kind of funny, but it's kind of not when you think of how imperiled soil is. This is just a headline from our national broadcaster saying that dust storms, I call them soil storms, are inevitable. That's just what I think. We had something like 3,000 hours of dust storms one year as that Mars rover was taking nice photos. This is a few tons of topsoil in some sheep yards. It's pretty hard to sort of picture what happens to topsoil. But when soil gets moved, when it becomes airborne or when it gets washed away, it ceases to be soil, starts to become dirt. And I was interested in this because I'm quite interested in how much soil we're losing. If we're losing topsoil 30 to 40 times faster than nature makes it, then we've got a bit of a problem. So nature's always making topsoil, but it's always being lost. But for 450 million years, maybe 600 million years, we've been making more soil. Nature has made more soil than we've lost on average. Depends on where you live. And so it's only in the last couple of hundred years we've really started to turn it backwards. Australia's going to abandon millions of hectares of land in the next 500 years. That's what's happening, not through climate change. The forecasts are based a little bit on that, but this is mostly through our treatment of soil. Globally, this is a nice, easy number. Those other numbers are too big, really. But for the averages, average loss of soil is about 9 kilos for every meal, every breakfast, every lunch, every dinner that every human on Earth eats. Now, there are lower estimates, but the lowest estimate is about 3 kilos. So imagine your lunch that you've probably just eaten, 3 kilograms of soil has been lost just for you for that meal. And that's these are global averages. It's going to be different everywhere. It's pretty important, though. Ireland loses about 1.5 tons of topsoil per hectare per year. This is mostly on your arable land. The EU average is closer to 2.5 tons per hectare per year. So it might look green and rolling there compared to Menindee, but there's problems. Australia loses 2.9 billion tons of topsoil every year, which is quite a lot. This is an iron ore train. But if you put all the topsoil that Australia loses into that train, that would stretch around the equator 15 times. And I was doing the numbers for Ireland because you obviously we're an older continent, drier, less plants, plant matter and green living plants hold soil together and they help it being washed away and blown away. But Ireland loses enough topsoil. If you put that that same train would run the length of the whole of Ireland, including Northern Ireland, the whole island of Ireland, 3 times. But Ireland is, Australia's 110 times bigger than Ireland. So if Ireland was the same as Australia, the train would stretch around the world 4.5 times. So it's a lot of topsoil to lose from a very small island. And so I think that's really important to think of. It's not just soil loss, but soil compaction. The UK, it's harder to get numbers for Ireland, I found, but because they're often combined with the rest of the EU. But the UK is estimated to lose, it's got at risk 4 million hectares of soil because of compaction. This is the sort of machinery that people are getting into. Obviously, that's America, pretty big, but they're at risk of compaction. And when we're talking compaction, 20% of the world's arable land is at risk of deep compaction from the machines we use. And that when we talk deep compaction, that's 2 meters down. That's massively low. So we've got a bit of a problem there. So it's our choice. We've got to decide, are we, Menindee or Mars? I like to give reasons to hope. I just want to tell a bit of a personal story. This is me. This is after a very wet few days, and this is my pig paddocks. I free range my pigs, and I'm not very proud of that photo. This is typically what humans have done, had a go, didn't do it on purpose, buggered it up, and I did what humans have typically done, left that piece of land, buggered it up and moved on, sold that farm and bought another one. And as I say, not proud of it, but that's the truth. This is our new farm. The blue line is our boundary fence. So up above that is the neighbours. Took a couple of photos, April 2016, trying to work out how to, look after topsoil. Topsoil, the indicators for good topsoil are, obviously green living plants and leaf litter and, length of grass. This one, you might be able to see some bare earth over here where my pigs have been. That's my pig paddocks. Pretty bare where the cows are, not particularly healthy. Took another one 5 years later, looking much better. But then I realised that actually was a wetter year, possibly. Didn't have very good records from 2016. So I took another photo the next year. So early this year, we just had the hottest, driest summer and autumn on record. And if you have a look, we've sort of changed our practices. And so now all this green living matter, I can't see any bare earth in the pig paddocks, is a sign of healthier soil. This is our market garden. So we have about 1 kilometre worth of garden beds growing our annual vegetables and perennials. That's a pig paddock, the pig shelter, had the pigs in there and then established the garden beds. So that obviously is looking better than it would have otherwise. So what I'm really interested in now, I'm a chef and I'm a farmer, is the connection between soil health and the nutrient density of food. And so there's not huge amounts of research on this, but it's all happening gradually. A lot of the research is not done because of the vested interests in just growing more crops, more dilute crops. So if you add artificial nitrogen, you can get a crop to grow bigger, quicker. They call it the dilution effect. So in theory, a head of broccoli has the same amount of broccoli as it had 30 years ago. You just have to, but a head of broccoli now is twice as big. That's sort of the general theory, but we know it's more complex than that. So what we do know is that the more living things you have in soil, the more complex the interactions with the plants that you grow, so the vegetables or the grasses and the grains that you grow, and the more possibility to have more stuff, more going on. So to give you a really simple example, so around the roots of a plant, you might have iron and calcium solubilizing bacteria. So they live really close to the roots of the plant. The plants don't need dirt. They need iron and they need calcium. So they can get other things from water and air, the carbon, the oxygen, the hydrogen, and the nitrogen they can get through the action of the fungi and maybe legumes. But if they need iron, how are they going to get it? They don't just suck up, bits of rock. They get it from the action of the living things in the soil. And we now know that more biologically active soil, more living soil, you can end up with more nutrient-dense food. And I love that because that actually means more flavour. You can actually tell flavour. Plants, with their interactions with things under the soil, so the way they're communicating, defending themselves, there are lots of chemicals passed between plants to soil and soils to plants. And there's up to 100,000 different biochemicals that plants have in their interactions with the underground ecosystem. And lots of those are things like phytochemicals, there's polyphenols, there's things that actually have a flavour. And we now know that, if you think of nutrition, don't think fats, protein, carbohydrates, don't even just think vitamins and minerals. we have to think of up to 70,000 different biochemicals in food that can have an effect on, that have a nutritional effect. And those are born in, through the relationship that a plant has with healthy soil. These are amazing things. These are compost worms, but worms, my God, don't have time today. Worms, absolutely love them. Heavy lifters, you can actually see them, so you don't have to use your imagination if you're digging in your paddocks. But there can be up to 7 million worms per hectare in healthy soil. 7 million. That's about 700 per square meters. That equate, all their worm holes and tunnels. They create air holes and places for water to store. That out the back end of them, you've got humic acids that are dissolving rock and a growth promotant for plants. You can have 900 meters, nearly a kilometer worth of worm tunnels per square meter. It's amazing what they're only small, but you get enough of them and they can do a lot of work. This is our market garden. Looking back, these are our pig paddocks. So this is just something that we've done well. I'm not sure if we've done it, because we know better. Well, we've just trialed different farming techniques. So now I don't end up with as much bare earth. Moving my pigs constantly every 4 days. So that's a couple of years later. Patches of bare earth from the same spot. This is it 9 years later. So we now have these trees. So this means that for every kilogram of pork, we store 77 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So these are apple trees that have grown back from the roots in here. And so we're carbon negative, climate positive. This is an amazing little ecosystem with the trees growing back. And you can see no bare earth in there from the same gate. So it's amazing what you can do. But we're no saints. I think scratch any farmer. When we talk about soil loss, a lot of farmers go, "Oh no, it's always someone else's farm, someone else's valley, someone else's country that's got the soil loss." This is somewhere we've really failed. This is about a metre deep erosion gully on our Winter Creek. So I just want to show that because I think scratch any farmer, hang around with them long enough, they've got an area they can probably show you and say, you know what, we can do better with that bit. That's the bit I'm not proud of. And I want to show you that because that's a place where I'm failing and I need to pick up my game. This is one way we've been trying to improve our soil. So we don't run organically on the whole farm, but there's no spray, no chemical inputs. The market garden is run organically, but it's pretty much on organic principles. This is a way of feeding soil. So we've actually grown a green manure or a cover crop directly into our grasslands. You can maybe see some of these. These are actually tick beans or broad beans, fava beans, you might call them. And we planted them to just feed the soil. The brown bit is my neighbour's abandoned vineyard, so you can just ignore that. But this is what we planted 1 April. So start of sort of in autumn, and then in spring I did 3 grazings with my cows. That's the same. It's just slightly down, but it's the same paddock, just slightly down the hill and looking back in a different direction. We found that doing that, we've had a 9 species cover crop. We increased the carbon in soil or the organic matter in soil by nearly 50% in just 18 months with a single feeding of the soil. So those crops, just like in your market garden, they were there just to feed soil. I did feed my animals because I don't have a tractor and we can't slash them back. So before they went to seed, we did that. This is just a quick one to show you the rhizobium bacteria. The plant. This is a pea. Around the roots of the pea are these little balls that the plant creates a home for the rhizobium bacteria. And those have gone pink. They go pink when they've got iron, oxygen, and nitrogen stored around the roots. So that shows that this plant is fixing nitrogen, but it's actually the bacteria that's doing the fixing of the nitrogen, not the plant itself. The plant and the bacteria. So plants have mad skills, but they need the soil life to express their mad skills. So they live in this symbiosis between healthy soil and healthy plants, and that's the thing as growers that we should never lose sight of. Now, what we want is food. What we want is good plants and good animals. How do we get it? The origin, the starting point is soil. Just a really quick one about us. We grow food for 5,000 meals a year on our 70 acres and employ about 10 full-timers. That's pretty good for our part of the world. I don't know what it'd be like for you guys, much more fertile, much deeper soil than we've got. But that's the sort of stuff that we're trying to do, is nourish our community, nourish our visitors to because we have a little restaurant, nourish our family, but our starting point is to nourish soil. We're carbon negative, storing it's probably about 150 tons of CO2 a year, sometimes in the soil, sometimes in trees. So that's a nice thing to be able to say in these days. And the choice is ours, I guess. What do we want? What do we want the place to look like? I know Ireland's very different to Australia, but I wanted to give you some sort of context. But what do we actually want? What do we want the world to look like? What's our role? And how can we grow food, nourish us, our communities, our societies, and not bugger it up? And again, I can't think 42,000 years into the future, but the way we're going, humanity is not going to get 42,000 years into the future unless we learn how to grow food on Earth, because we've got no chance of growing it on Mars. Thank you.
Hi, Matt. Can you hear me? I'm Suzanne. I'm chairing today.
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, cool. Great. Thanks for your wonderful presentation. I'm blown away by a lot of what you said there, but because we're slightly over time, I'm just going to get quickly to some questions that came in. One of the key things you began with was, when you talked about this idea with your publisher, and we have a question in from Kylie Magner, who I know farms hens down there, I think Tipperary or near Feathered. And she says, Matt, what has been the most effective way to communicate how important soil health is to non-soil nerds? What has worked for you?
It's generally that combination of things. People need a reason to care. So when you say it affects your gut health, your brain health, your nutritional health, then that's kind of when people start to become interested. There's a thing called L-ergothioneine. I'll try and make this a really quick one, but there's this lovely thing I like to relate. A chemical made in soil, only made in soil by bacteria and fungi, soil bacteria and fungi, ergothioneine, and it's made in soil, passed into the plant unchanged. So lots of things are made in the soil and plants, and they get changed as they pass. But this goes into the plant unchanged, goes into our gut unchanged. So oats is a really good example where they've measured it. It goes into our bloodstream unchanged, into our brain, because unchanged, which is a pretty remarkable feat to get from soil to our brains, and it has antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. And so it's actually an anti-aging, anti-dementia chemical. And again, you're going to think I've made this up. Look it up online, ergothioneine. But we know if you plough the field that grew the oats, you've cut the fungal hyphae, and you get less ergothioneine in the oats than if you hadn't ploughed the field. This is one chemical out of the 100,000 or more that are created and interactions with soil, healthy soil. Remember, 98% of what happens in soil, lives in soil, we still don't understand. So this is only one of them, and that's what we do know. Imagine what we don't know.
Okay, so maybe it's coming at that angle of, soil health is good for, mental health, as you said, for support in children, older people, all those angles to get people into it that way. Another question from Kylie is, how do you communicate, and this is very good for, I suppose, food producers that sell from their own farm, which is less really prevalent here in Ireland because we're mainly primary producers and we're kind of price takers, but for people who produce and sell from their own farm, how do you communicate the value of nutritional density and soil care that you may take, for example, to your restaurant, farm, shop customers? How do you do it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So the way we do it is trying to get people to understand that when they eat something, like a carrot is made of mostly carbohydrate. So it's going to taste sweet or starchy. That's the carbohydrate bit. That's the bulk of it. The flavor, the nuance, the complexity, the deliciousness is actually soil health. You can taste soil health. So when you have a fresh, and obviously things get worse the longer they're kept. Like we're talking seasonal and regional and fresh. All that kind of stuff. But soil health, we're all blessed with this thing on the front of our face that can actually distinguish, parts per trillion, tiny amounts of stuff, and those things actually give vegetables more flavour. Now, so a more delicious carrot, a more delicious piece of lettuce, a bit more delicious, kale, whatever, is an indication of nutrient density. So deliciousness, I love that because people love, it's easier to cook with and gives them more pleasure. It doesn't work for donuts, just saying.
Okay, the room, have you questions here for Matt? Anyone so far? While we're waiting, Sean, what would you like to say to him?
Yeah, Matt, really interested. What I wanted to ask you was, you showed photographs there in Tasmania of how things have got so bad. Is, from a policy perspective, are the policymakers taking note, or is there attempts? We're probably doing it particularly in the organic side, but are you seeing that in Tasmania as well?
Yeah, what's really nice, so Australia has they instituted a few years ago a national soils advocate. So our Governor General, so, we're still bloody, part of the British Empire, the King is our head of state, the new King. So we have a Governor General, but he was an ex-army dude, and he was travelling Australia, and he went, if you want to look at security, like national security, you need to look at food security. And if you want to look at food security, you need to look at soil. So this military man set up a national body, a national soil advocate, and we've just, today was the deadline for comments on the national soil strategy. It's become this huge topic. I mean, obviously we have thinner, more parts of our, of Australia, the soil is less than a centimetre thick, topsoil, the magic bit that does all the growing. But yeah, it's really great to see policymakers, because this can't happen alone. Like growers can't do it alone. There does need to be, I guess, I don't know, just like it's so fundamental that we overlook it and ignore it, topsoil. And yet, and the only way we can care for it and nourish it is if you have people from all levels, whether it's someone who's going to shop for their dinner on Tuesday night, thinking, is there a better way to buy? Is there a grower growing and policymakers saying, well, how do we do this from the top down as well as from the bottom up?
Is, our picture of Australia, we'd imagine, and I know there is, our picture in Europe would be these big cattle stations, and where you've desertification creeping in. I mean, I know Tasmania is slightly different and it's more lush and green. Are those sort of farmers acting on this? Like, they might be looking at land being blown away, but what actions are they taking, the big, more industrialised farms, rather than yourself, for example? Yeah,
that's a really interesting one. So, so the grain growers in some of the arid areas and the graziers in the marginal country. What's really amazing, I guess, and it's partly because we have lost so much soil. So parts of Western Australia have lost half their topsoil in about 40 or 50 years. A lot of those people are getting interested, but it's still from a really small base. It's kind of like, I compare it to veganism. People go, oh, there's like 5 times more vegans than there was 20 years ago. Well, that's because there were virtually none 20 years ago. So we were at a small base. But I reckon, I was looking at some numbers, we're about 15% of the lands managed in Australia. The farmers are actively looking to regenerate. I don't know if you guys use the term regenerative farming over there. Yeah. Here it's kind of considered either, some people think it's snake oil, just the term, but they're using regenerative techniques even if they don't say they're regenerative. 15%, which is great, because 10 years ago it would have been 5% or 4% or 3%. We've got a long way to go, but we're going in the right direction. 15%
is a lot higher than here, isn't it? I mean, we've only 2% of our land in organic. Am I right? And then further than that, we would never, nowhere near 15%.
No, but it's growing pretty rapidly now because of NOx mainly. But
because of NOx. Just one last thing. Any questions from the room before we wrap up with Matt? Everyone's okay? Okay, listen.
They're very shy.
Yeah, they are very shy. I know. I think they'll probably come alive later and start shouting at us.
It's after lunch. Now everyone's blood sugar's dropped.
I know, that's it. Listen, Matt, you're amazing. I'm going to look up your book because it's just, you're a good communicator on it, and I think that's what we need as well. You know, you understand the food side of it, the chef side of it, and also bringing those ideas in a poppy way to people, and I think that's really a challenge, you know, in Ireland, and we're really behind on soil health. So please, everyone, give Matt a round of applause, and his book is... title of your book again. Soil, the incredible story of what keeps the earth and us healthy. So thank you, Matt. We're going to have a little break now before we come back to our next speaker. Thanks very much.
Great stuff.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks, Matt.